Okay, thank you, Adrian, and good morning, everyone. For the next 10 minutes or so, I will speak to you about social and traditional media reporting during food crisis, and I'm focusing in particular on all of the findings from the FoodRisC project. So, as part of this project, we looked at 3 case studies. Firstly, we looked at the Irish dioxin crisis in pork, which occurred in 2008. Secondly, we looked at the German dioxin crisis in pork, chicken and eggs, which occurred late 2010, early 2011. And then finally, we looked at the German EUFIC crisis in sprouted seeds, which occurred in the summer of 2011. Now, in terms of the media monitoring tools that we used, for traditional media, we used 2 different tools. They were Factiva and LexisNexis. And in relation to social media, as Adrian has already described, we focused on using Radian 6. So looking at the Irish dioxin crisis, our monitoring was retrospective. We conducted our monitoring in 2 countries, and we looked at the reporting which occurred in both social and traditional media. For the German dioxin and German EUFIC crisis, our monitoring was conducted in real time. We monitored across 7 countries. And for the German dioxin crisis, we looked at reporting which occurred in social and traditional media, whereas for the German EUFIC crisis, we focused on social media alone. So, what did we find? We found a significant difference in the volume of reporting in both traditional and social media, with of course much more reporting occurring in the social media arena. So for example, for the German dioxin crisis, we had over 6,700 reports in traditional media compared to over 26,000 in social media. And if we look a little bit more closely at the social media data set across the 3 crises, we can see that this ranged from over 1,000 records for the Irish dioxin crisis to over 26,000 for the German dioxin crisis and to over 100,000 for the German EUFIC crisis. So in addition to significant differences in the volume of reporting, we also found significant differences in the speed of reporting during crisis. Firstly, we found that social media responded much quicker than traditional media. But secondly, we found that social media reporting declined quicker than traditional media. And you can see these 2 effects more closely in this slide here. On the left-hand side of your slide, you can see the reporting which occurred for the Irish dioxin crisis, and on the right-hand side for the German dioxin crisis. In both cases, the social media is represented by the blue line and traditional media by the red line. So as I said, we can see here the speed of reporting quicker in social media, but equally so, the decline in reporting quicker in social media. So what are the implications of this in terms of risk communication? Well, the main implication, of course, is for risk communicators not to miss the window of opportunity to communicate in social media. However, there are 2 main points to note in relation to this. Firstly, to be an effective communicator during times of crisis, FoodRisC communicators must be a trusted source on social media. And to be a trusted source, of course, you need to have a very strong social media presence, and you need to develop a good connectivity or bond with your audience during peace times. So following on from the social media presence as part of our FoodRisC project, we looked at the social media activity of 37 European food organisations, and we conducted this research in November of 2012. And from those 37 organisations, we found that 50% of the organisations were active on Facebook, 30% on Twitter, and 38% on YouTube. So it really shows us that while many organisations are embracing social media, there's certainly much room there for improvement. The second point to note is, of course, that risk communicators should communicate in a timely manner. And failure to communicate in a timely manner means that somebody else's voice will be heard. And this can be quite significant when we consider the length of time that information is retained within the social media arena. And this is known as the echo chamber effect. So we examined this echo chamber effect in relation to the German dioxin crisis. 20 months after the crisis, we inputted the term German pork into the Google search engine of the 7 countries which were originally monitored. Using that term, we looked at the results which were returned in the first 2 pages of Google, and we found that most of those reports related to the German dioxin crisis. And in fact, most of those reports were actually on the first page of Google, which is quite interesting, as when many people conduct a search on Google, they generally do not look past the first page of results. We also looked at what social media channels were the most prevalent when communicating on food risks. And we found that 3 channels were most prevalent irrespective of crisis. They were Twitter, online news, and blogs. In relation to Twitter and online news, we found a very strong connection between the 2 of these. Twitter was primarily used to inform the readers of breaking news and to refer the reader to more detailed information, and that was usually online news, and this was done via shortened URLs which were embedded in the tweet. Blogs, on the other hand, they're of course a very different communication channel than Twitter and online news. It's a very interactive channel where the communicator can interact quite closely with the audience. And the scientific literature really shows that during times of crisis, that many people, they place a higher credibility on the information which is communicated via blogs than information which is communicated via traditional communication channels. However, as I said, we had three top channels, but just to note, of course, that these 3 channels, they varied in prevalence. Number 1, between crises, which shows us that no 2 crises are the same. Secondly, they varied in prevalence within crisis. So we found that at the beginning of a crisis that Twitter was most important, but as the crisis progressed, that blogs became more important. And as Adrian has already mentioned, there was differences between countries. And of course, the implication of this for communicators is really to be very careful when selecting a media monitoring tool that you can track across a number of different channels. We also conducted a content analysis. So we wanted to look at what type of information that the audience was exposed to during the crisis. And we looked at many different parameters, but for today's presentation, I'm just focusing on 2 of those. I'm focusing on the primary story topic, and secondly, on the source which was quoted. So if we look at the primary story topic, we can see that in traditional and social media, there were 3 main groups of stories which were important. These stories fell within what we call a scientific frame, an economic frame, or a political frame. So irrespective of whether it was traditional or social media, these 3 were the most important. However, just again, 2 points to note. Firstly, that the reporting of public perception and reaction to the crisis were more common in social rather than traditional media. And secondly, that traditional media was a platform for national debate, whereas social media was more a platform for global debate. And then finally, in relation to the sources quoted in both traditional and social media, in traditional media, the sources quoted were political sources, for example, governments, ministers, so on. Secondly, expert sources, so for example, food safety authorities, health professionals, medics, and then thirdly, food suppliers. In social media, our sources were a little bit different. There was a very strong emphasis on online news, but also on political and expert sources. So in summary, these data are a snapshot of some of the findings from the FoodRisC project. They certainly improve our understanding of the changing media landscape and the relationships which exist between traditional and social media. And as pointed out at the beginning by Patrick, these and other findings from the FoodRisC project have fed into the development of the e-resource centre on FoodRisC communication. And this e-resource centre is available for everybody to look through during the breaks. So thank you.